Welcome to Tao Living, the Art of Living podcast with your host, Luke Corletto, where you will be supported to remember that you are the driver and not the vehicle, so that you can walk your life in trust. My guest on today's show is Master Sergeant Jarad Underwood. Master Sergeant Underwood is an Air Force survival, evasion, resistance, and escape specialist. He's also the manager of the Air Force Combatives Program. In this capacity, he works extensively to integrate character and leadership development, ethical decision-making under stress, and stress recovery into the Air Force Combatives Program. As a SERE specialist and prior Infantry Marine, Jarad has spent nearly 18 years working in the military and has multiple deployments in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom, Operation Enduring Freedom, and various other joint task force. You can contact Jarad at jarad.underwood@gmail.com. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Master Sergeant Jarad Underwood. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome to this episode of Tao Living, Master Sergeant Jarad Underwood. Jarad, it is great to see you again, sir. I am grateful for you taking your time away from your family life, your professional life, and the life that you lead as a specialist, as I've shared with the audience on your intro, as the specialist and the manager of the Combatives Program. First and foremost, I would ask you to help us unpack for the average bear who doesn't understand what the acronym SERE means, right? The Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape Specialist. So what is it that you do when you're teaching the military, and do I have this correct, that you're also one of the few experts who are allowed to cross-train people in the various branches of the military? Is that also accurate?
Yeah, so both in combatives, I'm uniquely qualified because I was the first, maybe still the only person to be certified in all the combatives training programs. And then my job, SERE is a joint requirement. So everyone in the DoD goes through SERE training. Each service supplies their own training. However, you can go to different services SERE training programs. That's not the case with everything, but it is with both aspects of what I do.
And in what you're allowed to share with civilians, what in essence are you teaching, right? What, as a specialist, what are you doing with and in the Air Force to support? So again, the average person, this is something you do on a daily basis. The average person who lives in this country has no idea that you are doing this for our servicemen and women to support them during times of intensity.
Yep. So basically what a SERE specialist does is it's kind of all in the acronym, survival specialist. So that means like being able to go out into the woods or any environment and live in that environment. So being able to procure food and water, different tricks to doing that, a lot of stuff that our great grandparents did, just because that's what it took to survive. Well, those are lost skills that we're trying to re-give people. So that's one part of it. We also get into the whole evasion and escape piece, where it's exactly like it sounds. We're working with people that have a potential of becoming prisoners of war or something happening to them, going down behind enemy lines, and trying to teach them all the different techniques to get back to friendly forces so that they can be reunited with their family and hopefully be unharmed, right? So that's where that evasion piece goes. And then obviously escaping captivity, as well as resisting different types of interrogations and things like, what do you do, or what are things that you can do to help resist and make yourself less appealing to the enemy should they get you in their custody? That's really what it comes down to.
So, ladies and gentlemen, an example is if I were in the service and I was a pilot and I was shot down and I landed in non-friendly territory. What Master Sergeant Jarad is teaching is, how can I survive in the wilderness, right? I just landed, I have nothing with me, nothing, right? So how do I, first of all, survive? And then how do I escape capture? And then if I were to, is how do I be able to sustain an interrogation to make it home safely, right?
Exactly. So and to not get caught. to evade.
Well, yeah, even better, right? To land and get out of there before anybody finds me, right? So
Yep.
that would be the ideal scenario for sure. So for the listening audience, the reason that I requested Master Sergeant Jarad to come on, and I'm grateful that he had, and he had to get permission from the military to be able to have clearance to have this conversation with civilians, right? So I'm really grateful that he went through that process and he got the clearance so we could have this conversation. Is if the elite military can learn how to survive in these settings, then what can we take as civilians, right? People walking everyday life. What can we learn from these processes? So that was the invitation, because I know some of the pieces that he teaches is how do we handle critical thinking under duress, right? Well, the average bear, if you're a business owner, if you work in an environment where it gets hot under your feet, right? So how do we stay cool, calm, and collective in the moment in order to sustain a clear head and use responses instead of reactions, right? And so this is these are skill sets that he teaches at the highest levels with people, and you'd be surprised at what some of those are, right? Some of them you might have heard on this podcast before, taught slightly differently, but still it's the root use of that, right? And so one of the things when you're well, I'll take a breath and edit that one out. Ethical decision making under stress. Can you clarify what that means, and how can we unpack that for civilians to use, right? For us common folk.
Okay. So I want to do two things. First, I want to backstep just a little bit. So a lot of the stuff that we teach obviously is beneficial in SERE, but where we actually got into this was in the combatives training. Right? So when we think of combatives training, we think of fighting, as most people do. However, there's a difference between fighting and combatives. Combatives encompasses fighting skills, but the ancient combatives that started in Asia when they had combative training was decision making, it was navigation, it was leadership. So we kind of went back to that and went down this rabbit hole and started working with the Human Performance Lab, strength and conditioning coaches, and everybody. And we got into this all-encompassing program that allows us to just make people better at doing just that ethical decision making, operating under stress. And then we tried to create it in a way that it's easy to take away, right? So that's where a lot of this stuff comes from. So I want to clarify that, and then we'll get into kind of what some of this stuff means. When we think about ethical decision making, so whenever something happens, we have to make a decision, right? We're making decisions all the time, making a decision to talk, what we're going to say next, to making a decision to go down the road, whatever the case is. Now, those decisions become increasingly harder when we have different types of pressures. So if they're internal pressures, external pressures, or different stressors, right? Things that have emotionally, things that are going on inside of me, something happened that's caused a traumatic event, and I'm having to make decisions and process information. And so what happens is we kind of go back into our primitive mindset of just functioning, right? Just functioning. So that's can be a problem in a lot of arenas. It's definitely a problem in the combat environment to just start functioning, because that can lead to endangering myself or others. But even like you're talking about in the business world, in sports, in the heat of competition, going back to those, when I experience those high levels of stress and my ability to make decisions and process information goes down, what happens is I'm giving my opponent the advantage, because they're deciding and they're dictating what I do. So when we get into ethical decision making, it's really just being able to make the appropriate decision, right? What is ethical? What is the right thing to do in this situation that benefits me and all parties involved, right? Without doing any damage or undue damage, unnecessary damage. And how do I hone my ability to do that under stress? Because it becomes harder because I react, right? It's the difference between if I'm at a bar and something happens, punching someone in the face when I really shouldn't have, or not, or walking away when I could have, right? Because I reacted versus acted. I let them control the environment. I let them dictate the situation to me and thus dictate my response. So what we'll talk about is kind of things that are different ways that we currently teach people to control that environment, right? To control that situation, control your reactions, because you can do it, right? And by controlling your reactions, now you're dictating to the other person what their reactions need to be.
Excellent. So, ladies and gentlemen, where we're getting at from this is when life happens, right? So everyday life, if it's just going on and flowing, no problem, nothing's happening. We're all going to function from that, we're in a place of ease, right? There is no challenge upon us. But when life starts to squeeze us, whatever that environment, as Master Sergeant just said, be it a sporting environment, business environment, a relationship environment, you just received a phone call, somebody that you love and care about passed unexpectedly. Here comes this information, and it now potentially, depending on where we're at in our own ability to process information, right? So this has a lot to do with our nerve system. If the nerve system is in duress and we get just a little bit too much extra information, that's enough to potentially put us in the corner, quote unquote, sucking our thumb. We're out of the game now. I can't think straight. I need somebody to think for me. I'm not making any decision, let alone effective decisions. So that's one option. There's a million in between. And the other scale of the option is that I get to stay present, because it is just information, no matter what comes my way, right? If whatever the stress or duress or threat that shows up in my life, I can check out of the show and let the fear paralyze me, or I can use certain techniques to stay present and make a conscious decision, right? I still have access to what we call our neocortex, that I'm here using my higher functions of my nerve system versus unplugging from that and defaulting and going back into primitive parts of my nerve system where I'm now reacting. And a lot of those reactions aren't necessarily going to be healthy or sustainable, right? For myself or others around me. Yeah. So what have you found through all of this re-engineering, right? Going back and going, okay, human performance and decision making under duress. What tools have you found that have become most efficient in your training as a specialist?
So one of the most efficient tools, and this is more on the backside of it, is far as bringing me back to the present, bringing me back into focus, is breath work, which I know you talk about it all the time. So we've worked with our human performance lab and developed actual breathing protocols, and we have different ones for different things. So someone that's in the moment, and I'll reference some of the like combat situations, right? Because that's what we train to, but it applies across the board. So someone who is clearing rooms and they end up engaging, their stress goes through the roof. Even people that are trained can start to find themselves going into this place where they can't make decisions anymore. So we have breathing protocols that you identify that, you start to engage those, and you bring that heart rate down, you open that aperture up, and now you can focus, right? It's quicker. We also have breathing protocols. It's like, hey, when the fight's done, now I've got to bring it down, because I can't live in that constant state of my nervous system just going crazy, right? And that's what was happening with a lot of our high level military members. They were constantly in this high state of stress because they lived this intense deployments, intense marriages, intense lifestyles, intense training, and they never got to come down. Mm-hmm. So, the sympathetic versus parasympathetic nervous system, and how we start to bring people back into the present, be able to focus. And so breath work is number one. And it's actually been really cool. Our human performance lab partner that helps us with this is amazing. And so she's developed out these breathing protocols that we teach our people when they're in training. And I'll be happy to share them with you. I can email them to you when we're done, so you can have them, because they're self-explanatory, just breathing things. And you might have some of the same stuff that gets in, or that does the same thing, but you can see what we're doing. And the whole idea is to just be able to bring you back into focus, because as we start to move into these higher states of awareness, right, our ability to make decisions decreases. We get tunnel vision. We start to lose our fine motor skills start to decrease, and we can't process that information quick enough. So breathing is the number one way to do that.
Excellent. So as a recap, ladies and gentlemen, when Master Sergeant Jarad's talking about this, is you're talking about someone. So to use those terms is a potential clarifying in case people aren't clear what that word is to clear a room. This, and you clarify for me if I'm trying to make this simple as well for my little understanding. So these are military folks walking into clearing the room is to make sure there's no threats in the room. So if I walk in the room and I'm making sure that there's someone else in there that is not armed, but if they happen to be, now there's an engagement. In order to stay present when there's live fire coming at you versus, again, dropping into a ball and everything goes. So tunnel vision, literally your nerve system just goes, and we start to lose the ability to have awareness of what's around me and who's around me. And that's a momentary process that happens instantaneously unless we train ourselves to stay in control of the situation. And one of the most powerful techniques, as I just asked, was different forms of using breath. This is a conscious decision to then re-engage myself, re-engage my nerve system to bring me back into what's called the parasympathetic and the rest and digest versus the sympathetic or fight and flight. So these are processes. It wasn't too long ago that the current science said that it was impossible to intervene into your heart rate and blood pressure, that you couldn't regulate that because they're under what's called the autonomic nervous system. Nonsense. And so we have capacities to do that. And one of the most profound is the conscious use of our breath to bring us back into the moment, to be able to think clear, see clear, and down regulate the nervous system. And another aspect that Master Sergeant was just sharing, which was folks that are in high sustained capacity, the body's flooding itself with biochemistry that is essential for these heightened states to perform and or survive, but they're non-sustainable. No human being can live in that capacity at those levels for any length of time without frying the system. And so then there are techniques and necessary tools in order to downregulate, to come out of those moments in a healthy and productive way, right? So how does this play out in your life? Well, check into your life, right? If you happen to be a business owner and the government comes in and says, whoop, we're shutting you down. Well, that's going to put you in a certain state, right? If you're an employee and they come in and say your position has been taken away, that puts you in potentially put you in a certain state. But you do not have to be a victim to the moment. You get to choose, if you choose to, take certain things, techniques like breath, and the breath works that are shared from Jarad. I will definitely put them into play with his permission, and share them in a link at the bottom of this episode, right? And so what we're getting at is life happens. Now, there are certain people who put themselves in higher positions, be it high-end athletes or military, or certain situations where they know indeed that this is coming to them. Therefore, their level of training to be able to handle these are at high levels. And you and I can also take these same protocols or techniques and skill sets and apply them to our life, because life is going to always be coming at us. As long as you're breathing and you're on top of the planet, life happens.
Yep, it does.
And right, so the mindset is either life happens for you or life happens to you. If you're in the place where life happens to you, then you're still playing more the victim mentality, and you're going to be subjected to these experiences in an unfun way. I'll put it that way for now. Versus if you choose to participate intentionally, then you can actually step into the driver's seat, right? So breath was one of the most powerful ways. What other ways have you uncovered and that you apply to teaching to help people in stressful situations to be able to stay present?
Okay, so I'm gonna hit on three things, and then I'm going to hop into that. So one thing I want to talk about too is the fact that a lot of times when guys are clearing rooms or going into those rooms, they know a threat's in there. So they're going in there in this heightened sense. So what does that mean for those guys outside the door? They're already starting to get that tunnel vision. They're already starting to get amped up. So being able to be present, utilize that breath work is like, it's instrumental in being able to just get in the door and do what you need to do, because you know that someone's going to start shooting as soon as it opens. So that's a big piece. Also, when it comes to the breath work, so two things with this. One, which is super cool, is that when we do all of our training, we put people in heart rate monitors, and we throw those heart rate monitors up on a screen. So there's this huge screen in the room that everybody can see what everybody's heart rate is. And so we start to run scenarios, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, these high stress scenarios, and we put them through that, and we start we watch their heart rate just go, go, go. And then we start shouting out breathing protocols from the dude, and they start engaging in them. And then what we do is we watch those monitors and their heart rates fall. And they go from like, I don't know what to do. Oh, okay. Nope. This, I know what, okay, I need to do this now. I got to go over here. So they start picking up on that. And it's absolutely amazing to see. So you get to see it in real time. But what's really cool about that piece of it is that I have people that I've trained call me and they're like, hey man, I use that every night. I use it because me and my wife had an argument, and instead of getting in an argument, I took 30 seconds, deregulated or regulated myself or deregulated down. I'm like, okay, so let's actually approach this differently. Or I go train every night. I do something that's high intensity every night. And so this is the only way I could sleep. Until you taught me this, I couldn't sleep. So I start to hear stories about people incorporating this in their day-to-day lives and doing big things with it, making decisions and helping live in the moment.
Beautiful.
Right? So
yeah,
that's
sorry,
really
sorry to interrupt. So taking that exact thing into layperson functionality, let's say you're a college student and you're going into a final exam. If this final exam in some universities, some of these finals are like 50% of your grade for the entire semester. And that load of, oh my gosh, if I don't perform well on this test, I could fail or drop massive letter grades or what. So here there's now stress that's being put on self to perform. And just going into taking this test in that state is going to ensure that you won't perform at peak capacity, right? And so taking 2 minutes before sitting down at the desk, or once you sit at the desk, right? It's already happened. Learning how to get back into the present moment. You'll then be able to access all the information that you've been studying for the last how many ever weeks, that you've shoved it into your brain for this test, to then access it with ease to then perform on this test to make sure the outcome is what you're looking for, right? Walking into the boss and asking for a raise, right? Going, oh no, what if they say no? And all of that versus simply choosing to activate these processes. As Jarad was just saying, it's not just for the elite athletes or military, it's for all of us in daily function. How can I downregulate at night after a really busy day with clients? Breathe in a certain way to calm the system down so I can sleep, heal, rest, and repair to wake up the next day fresh, not exhausted. Sorry for the interruption.
Nope, that's exactly right. When we see that with people, especially tests, right? Tests are really big because I do work at the Air Force Academy, and so I get to interact with cadets, college students, and so we see these high levels of stress in these tests bring, and how just taking 2 minutes, engaging breathing protocols, bringing your heart rate down, letting that stress go. Now you can actually focus on what you need to do, and then applying it, just like you said, to work, whatever the case is. There's nothing wrong with, you've got a lot of stuff coming at you at work, you're at your desk, there's all these things happening. 30 seconds, breathe, bring your heart rate down, open your focus, re-engage, one target at a time. So all that stuff is really big, and it's very, very transferable. Right? The big thing is consciously making that decision to breathe, but even more so, I think it's really understanding that it's time to make that decision. Right? Because a lot of times, and that's the thing though, is people don't think about it because they have all these other stresses, so they're not thinking about doing it. You have to practice it. You have to make it habitual so that you start doing it. Excellent. Right? And then it doesn't matter where you are in this spectrum of stress. At any point, you can be like, okay, I've got to stop for a second. I got to breathe. So it's all really, really good. It's beneficial, and it's how we start to control our stress response. Right? Breathing is how we control it, at least in the beginning.
100%. So, ladies and gentlemen, that piece there is huge, which is, it doesn't matter where you are on the quote unquote stress spectrum, where you can intervene. You can intervene anywhere along the spectrum. Over time, it's most efficient if you intervene early on in the process. But while you're learning this and while you're applying this to your life, interject or pattern interrupt anywhere along the spectrum, because then you'll break the cycle from that point out and bring yourself back online. And then if you don't stay present, it will build itself again. You'll find yourself back into that place where stress is ensued, your breathing is shallow, your heart rate's up, everything's starting to come in tunnel vision. Those are signs to go up and bring yourself back online. And the more you put this into play, then the more it's there for you on a regular basis. And you can now start to interact on the subtle cues. You don't have to wait till it spirals into HE double hockey sticks before you look up and go, oh, I'm drowning again, right? Please.
Okay. Nope. So that's the open with breathing, right? And kind of how that plugs in. So now let's talk about some of the other pieces with stress, dealing with stress. So first off is a lot of people, so everyone has varying levels of stress that they've dealt with. So they have various points that they understand how to operate in, right? And so one of the things that helps at least increase your stress tolerance is inducing stress in a controlled environment. So we do that through several ways, and I'll talk about some of those when I talk about actual decision making, the process that goes into decision making, and how we identify stress levels, or what we've done to help identify where we are in stress, so that we can talk about it and we can start to realize what needs to occur where as we become more familiar with it. But the big thing is introducing stress into your, I don't want to say introducing stress in your life, because that's not what you want, but taking the time to subject yourself to uncomfort, right? So even things, a lot of people have a lot of opportunity and benefits in this world, so they don't understand what real uncomfort is,
Touche.
So
first world problems.
Right. And not saying that what they've experienced as uncomfortable isn't uncomfort to them, because it absolutely is, and it's real and it's uncomfort for them, but they're capable of being much more uncomfortable in life. So one of the things I always talk about is like, hey, take a cold shower. That's a good place to start. Right? Understand what it's like to kind of be miserable for a minute, and understand like, okay, well, now I've increased my ability to handle this external stressor a little bit better because I've done it. Right. And so you can start doing things like that. We do a lot of scenario training, obviously, with combatives and room clearing type stuff, close quarters battle, room clearing type things. We do a lot of stress tolerance thresholds with that through heart rate. So your heart rate is a good indicator of where you fall in the spectrum of stress, right? Your heart rate, it's a decent indicator of that, at least for training purposes and for just starting to understand kind of your stress tolerance for things. So lower levels of stress, you achieve a higher heart rate. It's probably because those lower levels, or what I would consider lower levels of stress, and people may not, are more challenging for you, right? But we can increase that. We can increase that by engaging in the moment and by allowing ourselves to work through the process with in this controlled environment of stress, so that I can do better. So one of the things that we like to do, honestly, is exercise. So this is kind of it sounds kind of funny, but what we'll do is we'll put heart rates on monitors on people, but you can do it without a heart rate. When your heart rate's up, because you can feel it. And plus, everybody has connected devices these days. I mean, you almost always know what your heart rate is anyway, but we'll put them in this and we'll run them through a quick protocol of exercise, something to get their heart rate up. Then we put them in front of a cognitive task, right? Something very simple. Maybe we give you something to remember. We do some exercises. we have you perform this cognitive task, which can be as simple as identifying shapes and colors, keeping time, and then you have to recall the shapes and colors that I told you to remember at the beginning. And it may be like, and we start out small and we start to increase it, and we start to increase it. So what we're doing is essentially giving you more stress to have to perform cognitively under. And now we're increasing your ability to do so. And now then we introduce breathing. So now you're able to regulate that stress a little bit. You're able to dial it back so you can function a little bit better. And we continue to do this to the point that we're moving you through the stress spectrum heart rate wise, right? So let me clarify that I understand, like, the stress of being in a car wreck, your heart rate spikes, these things happen. How that's induced is different than running. However, what studies at least are starting to show is that while it's different, there's some transferability to my ability to function under that stress, right? There's transferability. So while I can't put you in a car wreck and then have you do something, I can increase your heart rate to the levels that we've identified inside of the spectrum. Then I can have you perform cognitive tasks. Then I can do it more, and I can move you up this spectrum. So when I talk about the spectrum, one of the things we did was we took Colonel Cooper was a Marine who developed a color-coded system for stress years ago, I think in the 60s. And then in the 90s, Dr. Grossman actually took that and added the biomarkers of heart rates. And so we took both of the stuff that they did and working with their human performance lab and running these tests over and over and over and over on different individuals, we kind of came up with our own variation off of those, integrating the biomarkers and understanding like what happens at those different levels in a real world environment versus what happens in a training environment, and kind of how we're able to build that out. And so we developed this color-coded system with these biomarkers, and actually each biomarker each level of stress on this spectrum is given a breathing protocol for it. So it's like, if you're here and this is where you identify, here's the breathing protocol to engage in. Okay, we're actually up to here now. Here's the breathing protocol to engage in. Let's get down and let's shift gears, right? So we've developed this out, and this is how we use stress to train. Is now that we have these biomarkers, we can start out very low. When we get you there, and the cognitive task is relatively simple. Maybe it's identify the purple triangles, right? That's all I'm doing. And then I'm recalling numbers. And then we start to increase the amount of stress. We start to increase that heart rate. We get to these next levels of stress, right? And then we increase the cognitive task, or we start to add noise. So one of the things that is really beneficial as you progress through this is now your cognitive tasks are very pointed because I'm under stress and there's a lot of noise. So maybe I have a chart and it's got different color shapes with different color numbers and different color letters. And so I get you to this high state of stress. So you've got your heart rate up, and I'm like, hey, I just want you to tell me what color the threes are. So now I have to pick out certain information from this, right? So we just begin to integrate this training so that I can increase my stress threshold, right? And by increasing my stress threshold, I start to increase my ability to process data under stress.
Brilliant.
And that's where that big piece is. And some other stuff that we do is a lot of vision training. So your eyes are really cool. And this is something that I learned about 2 years ago working with our human performance lab, is that your eyes, like every other, like your biceps, your eyes have muscles. And it's 8 muscles. They can be trained just like you would any other part of your body. In fact, you can train them to the point that we don't allow pilots in training to do the vision training because they can pass when they shouldn't. But there's also a correlation there between my eyes and my brain because of their proximity and how they relay information to my brain that allows me to open up my aperture for data input. Right. So when we talk about decision making inside of all this, we use something that a guy named Colonel Boyd came up with years and years ago, the OODA loop. Have you ever heard of the OODA loop?
Yes, sir.
So the OODA loop is really big for a number of reasons. One, because it breaks down the decision-making process, and by breaking down what's occurring. So everybody does the OODA loop, like that happens. You may not realize it, but it's happening. And so what he did was he gave us a way to train the different parts of decision making so that we could make them better. So it's all about observing, right? How much data can I input into my brain, and orienting how much data can I process so that now I can make a decision, right? And then I make that decision, and then I act it out, and then this process repeats. When we talk about the fact that, like, inside of, just so everybody knows, OODA loop stands for observe, orient, decide, and act, and then repeat loop. But it's not necessarily a checklist as much as it's overlapping, and it just keeps going, and it happens in a second. It's not this long drawn out thing, but by understanding how to train, or by understanding what each one of those do, how they perform in our cognitive process, we can train each one of those. Now we can train them under stress. Now we can overload the senses. We can start adding noise and start having individuals pick it out. And what we're seeing is that I hit this high heart rate, I can deregulate, while I can also identify the information, while I can also do all of these other things and function in high stress environments more efficiently.
Beautiful. So what I would like to, I'd like to unpack some of what you just shared and just kind of restate and some reframe for the listening audience. Excuse me. First and foremost, I'd like to bring to the tabletop, which is the negative connotation that the word stress is achieved. Because when people speak of stress, it's only under the negative connotation that stress is bad and deadly. And that's nonsense. Stress is just stress, right? So learning a new language is stressful. It is stressful because it's new, but it's beneficial, right? Exercising is stressful, even when it's done perfectly, even when it's done under proper training, right? A high-level coach, right? Or facilitator. It is still stressful to the body. It's meant to be, because that's how we grow. The world has put stress under one bucket, bad and negative. Therefore, people want to avoid it at all costs. You can't grow without stress in any capacity, right? And so the beauty that I hear that Jarad is sharing with us, and also what he does on a daily basis, teaching in this environment, is so if it's your workplace, if it's your family, if it's your athleticism, whatever part of your life, playing safe is a psychological comfort zone, but it actually backfires on us, because then we're not increasing our capacity or our performance ability. So if you want to get better at any task, if you want to be more valuable to your workplace, right? To anything, your team, your workplace, we have to improve our capacity. And the only way to do that is to put ourselves in uncomfortable positions to grow outside of our comfort zone, right? It's nice to be in a comfort zone because we've done work and it's great to enjoy that. But over time, that comfort zone becomes now a trap, and we're no longer growing. So think about dribbling, right? If you take a ball and just dribble in one capacity, great. And you put in hours and hours and hours and hours, you're going to be great at that. But you can't dribble between your legs. And most people don't want to do that because, oh, I'm going to mess up. I'm going to look silly because it's a new stressful situation. If you don't focus on messing up and looking silly, but focusing on the capacity that I'm going to grow my ability to be a better dribbler and basketball player, I need to put myself in these circumstances. And so these capacities that Jarad's sharing with us is great. How, especially that term, how do you improve your ability to process information? And to intentionally do that in a controlled environment allows us to safely up-level our nerve system's capacity to do just that. And now you are tapping into being a better being, to be a better version of yourself, because this is for everyone. This doesn't require you have all the tools necessary, but it does require the environment in order to achieve that.
Yeah, and thanks for clarifying that a little bit, because yes, when I'm talking about stress, I'm not talking about something bad. It's just new, and it creates these pressures, right? And we talk a lot about internal and external pressures versus stress, because stress does have a negative connotation to it when it really shouldn't. Not always, right? Another thing we talk about is eustress. like, training in eustress versus getting into stress. And that's a whole nother thing. But at the end of the day, it's just pressures. And whether those internal pressures and external pressures are good or bad, there's still pressure to do something. The ball, the basketball analogy was great, dribbling, right? Just because that's the whole thing, is it's just outside of what I know and understand. And by putting myself in those things that I don't understand, I generate growth, right? And I guess what I'm saying is, it's good to generate growth, but don't generate growth in a single plane when we have the capability to grow ourselves multidimensional throughout, right? So we have this stressful component. Well, now let's start integrating decision making, right? Or at least information processing, right? Information input. Let's start adding that, which is why sports are great for this, because basketball, I'm having to focus on what I'm doing. I'm focusing on what everybody else is doing, continuing with the basketball analogy, right? So I'm able to start to include that. So I know one of the big things that I talk about is, like, with training, when guys go back to their home bases, or they go back to where they're from and where they're stationed at. One of the things I talk about is your training should not be linear anymore, right? Like, you get done while you're doing squats. You know what you should be doing? You should be having someone call out things that you're having to identify, right? Hey, while you do squats, I'm going to call out a color, and I want to know all the numbers that are that color, right? And so I've got this chart, and they're calling out colors, and I'm calling out numbers, right? And then I move over to this next piece where I was doing squats, and now I'm over here doing target acquisition with my laser pistol, right? And then I go and I do some sort of cardio while I'm also doing vision training, or whatever the case is, right? So I'm growing myself multidimensional, because as we begin to grow our ability to operate under stress doesn't come at us. It's not singular, I guess, right? Like, when we get into these environments, everything's not perfect, and there's this one thing that we have to deal with, because that's not a high stress environment. That's okay. Here's a problem set. The problem is, like, when we're at work or we're at home, and the kids crying, the spouses had a bad day, the
power just went out.
To cook dinner, right? Like, I've got all these things, so I need to learn how to deal with multiple things at a time, and that's where that integrating everything together starts to build your capacity to operate. It's software, right? Software, not hardware. We're upgrading.
And this is the beautiful piece right there on that end piece that Jarad just shared is, if you look at, so we're using computers to hold this process through Zoom, right? And I'm speaking to the listening audience. And the computer, let's say this computer is 2 years old, and now there's a new piece of software that comes out. Well, I literally have to pay to get this computer upgraded. It needs new components to be able to run newer software. The beauty about you and I is we are self-regulating, self-upgrading systems, because we're a live dynamic. We're not machines. We've been taught to see each other as machines. The healthcare system is completely based on that. You're a broken machine that needs to be fixed and repaired, and it's nonsense, right? When we have the capacity to continually upgrade this software, never ending until we cap it ourselves because of lack, limitation, or simply fear. I don't believe I have the capacity to do that. And that's all that is a belief. Yet for you, it might be true because you own that belief. However, it's not true in the real sense of the word, because put in proper setting, you could completely upgrade that software and blow your own mind and surprise yourself on what you're capable of. I don't recall the author of the quote, but it was, we do not know how strong we are until we are forced to be strong. And that's the gift of life, right? So when life squeezes us, are we going to sit down, or do we get to stand up? And that's a choice. And if we've spent the last umpteen years of our life avoiding challenging situations, when this new challenge arises, we're going to be sitting down for the most part. Versus if we consistently and courageously step into the new opportunity, the new challenge to grow thyself, in our mind, in our body, in our spirit, and our psychological capacity. All of these, as Jarad said, not a linear format, right? So non-linear. Then we become better, period, as people, better for our in our relationships. We're better human beings, better in our performance, be it at the workplace or athleticism, or your community overall. You have more to give because you now have more capacity.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's awesome to watch. Like, so I ran a course about this time, about a year ago. It was a little later. It was around May, June timeframe. And so I had a specific individual in there who had little experience in anything we were doing, but they were there because of their responsibilities back at their base. And they were charged with doing some things. So they had to come here, and they got this training, and it was way outside of their comfort zone. And so I watched them on day one, and then I watched them grow and develop as we continue to build their ability to function under stress. We build their ability to do these things. And I watched them grow to the very end, where now I have this person that is not even the same, because this training is 3.5 weeks that I do, right? It's not even the same person that showed up. They're more confident. They're able to deal with things. And it's really interesting because we talk about the decision matrix, right? What are the 3 things that affect every decision that you make? And we kind of can boil them down to very simple. We call it courage, character, and competency. But really what it is what do I think that I should do? Or what do I know I should do? What am I willing to do? And what am I capable of doing? Right? Those are the things. Now, capability depends on that's your skill set, right? Like, if something's happening and I need to physically intervene, I'm capable of physically intervening. I'm okay with that. Somebody may not be, but what are they capable of doing? Well, they're capable of getting someone that can, right? So what do I need to do? What do I need to do? What am I able to do? And what am I willing to do? Those are the kind of how we frame our decision making. So if you start to increase someone's capability, right? They learn a skill set, or they develop physically in whatever it is they're trying to do, their ability to make decisions changes. What am I willing to do? As someone grows as a person, and they start to become capable in things, now they're more willing to do other things, right? So the more experiences you have changes what you are and aren't willing to do, right? That courage piece. And then what do I think that I should do? That's character, right? That's where we get into the ethical component of decision making. So the whole concept of, I have these 3 things that frame my parameters. I understand what goes into making a decision. Now I understand, like, there's different levels of stress, and how those different levels of stress on that spectrum affect my ability to do that. Well, I have ability to regulate that. I've increased my stress threshold. I have ability to regulate that. I have ability to control the decision-making process so that I'm the one making decisions. And I understand the parameters that guide my decisions. So I can get to that decision point quicker, and I can make better decisions because I'm constantly developing myself. And the more that I do so, the more that I engage in new experiences, gain new lessons, allow controlled stress to be put on me, the more that I make decisions and operate in those environments where I can grow my ability to function there, the better I'm going to be at doing it every day. You know, things that used to be stressful to me, or used to cloud my decision making, my judgment, because I would revert back to that more primal instincts of, like, I just have to do this thing, right, wrong, or indifferent, because this is all I know to do, to now where I'm getting into environments that are significantly higher in happening, stress going on, different types of pressures going on, a lot clearer, and I'm able to focus. And when I'm not, I can engage breath work. I can come back down so that I can focus.
Brilliant.
Right? And that's the whole point.
100%. So the confidence loop, right?
Yeah.
As when people don't feel confident is because they don't feel they have the capacity. Once they grow capacity, then they have that feeling of competence. Excuse me. And ladies and gentlemen that are listening, this is for every single person on the planet. I was just sitting here. Part of me was, as I was listening to Jarad, I'm also stepping outside and visualizing what if we applied this in our quote unquote academic settings? What instead of putting kids in a desk for 8 hours a day doing one task, only activating one aspect of their capacity, which is not, it's sometimes challenging in one capacity, but it's unplugging all the other capacities. So we're decreasing the ability to learn in the true context of learning. And so how this would change children, how these therefore changing adults, right? We would change our culture. We would change, especially that place of self-esteem, because when character is down, I don't feel so good about myself because I don't even trust myself, let alone for myself, but then in the scenario of being of service to other people. And when I grow, as Jared was just talking about, when I grow my self-esteem, when I grow my character, right? Just a couple of days ago, I was teaching my event, Design Your Life, and we dove into character in a big way. The original Greek etymology is, right? It's a mark, it's a stamp on the soul, right? Who you be. Well, too many people have been listening to about who you are not. You're feeding who you are not, what you're not capable. And that's what you're focusing on. It's nonsense. Stop it. It's a disrespect to who you be, meaning who you are as a person of unlimited potential and capacity. Start buying into that story and then start living into it by doing some of these tasks that you're hearing from Master Sergeant, which is challenge yourself, right? Have the courage to put yourself in positions safely to up-level your system, right? They're still challenging, but safe environment. And then you're going to feel better about yourself because you now have increased your capacity, which, as he said, then your willingness to show up, your willingness to be of service, all of that expands. And it just feels good to know that you have grown. And now you're sharing that growth with those around you.
Yeah, when I talk about the decision matrix, it's cyclical and overlapping, right? They're not, it's not a checklist. It's not one, then one, then one. And just like you said, they affect each other, right? Like as one goes up, the other one goes up. As I become more confident in one aspect, right, I become more courageous in that other aspect. As I grow myself, my ability to handle stress and my individual character, my self-esteem, well, now my confidence is up too, right? I have a competency. I'm more willing to engage in these competencies because I understand that I am capable. It's not that I'm not, right? Even though I have a skill set, maybe I'm not as capable as other people. You start to get away from that mindset and you start to realize like, no, I actually can because I understand where I am and I understand what I can do. And that those possibilities are endless.
And here's a next level piece building onto this, ladies and gentlemen, which is this. It's so amazing, which is a few minutes back, Jared was talking about exercises for the eyes, right? There's intrinsic muscles in the eyes that we can grow them like any other muscle. But remember, the eyes do not see. The eyes are just focus apparatus to get back into the brain. But here's what's really cool. When you apply yourself in these dynamics that we're discussing, you literally change your brain. When you change your brain, you change how you see. You change your perception. Therefore, your worldview changes. You literally are becoming a different person. Upscaling, right? So let me clarify, different, but upscale different, a better version of yourself. Everything starts changing. You change how you see what's happening in the world, and your viewpoint on that, because you have fundamentally shifted who you are and how you're expressing yourself. That is cool.
Yeah. It's all about upgrading, right? Making the best version of myself. And I can continue to do that. I can continue to grow because I can continue to improve my ability to operate and function in society, in the world, under different levels of stress, good stress, bad stress, right? I can continue to grow that. And the more I grow it, the more my decision matrix grows, right? That courage, character, and competency, the more that expands. And the more I expand that, the more that I'm willing to do and the more that I'm willing to grow myself.
And so ladies and gentlemen, and you're listening, please just rewind and listen to the whole thing. But that last 30 seconds Jared just shared is then look how that plays out in your life. you now in the workplace, you're now more valuable. And if you're more valuable, you can then request more financial exchange for your value, right? So this isn't just for self-development in an isolated format. This can change your entire life by applying these principles. You become better for your community, better at however you define community, right? Be it in the service, at the church, at the workplace, on your athletic team. You have more to bring to the table, which you do. We all do. So as it's been said, right? Our life is a gift from God. What we do with it is our gift back, right? And then it's a call to action. Do not just show up in status quo. Put yourself in positions that up-level yourself. You deserve it. And I use a little bit of guilt pressure. It's imperative that you do it for the rest of us, right? This is how the world becomes a better place. So it's my job to upgrade me, and that's it, first and foremost. But if we're all doing it, or more people are doing it, then we do have a better world to live in, right? So this is a multi-concentric impact from these aspects that we're having this conversation around right now.
So something that, so it's a military context, right? But the guy that invented the OODA loop, Colonel Boyd, said something to the tune of, the person who survives the fastest rate of change wins, right? He's obviously talking about different aspects, but if you think about how that plays out, when we talk about decision-making under stress, right? As we get under stress and we lose the capacity to make decisions efficiently, we're losing the ability to operate in the environment. Well, we can fix that. That's fixable. And if we fix that, now we can continue to grow, right? I know he says survive, but when we think about it as growth, I need to adapt my ability to function in a rapidly changing environment, because that's what's happening all day, no matter what we're doing or where we're at. We're at work, we're at sporting events, we're with our team, we're at church, whatever. Things are changing, things are coming at us. Well, we can increase our capacity to function in those environments and thus flourish, just like you said. Right? We can make ourselves better, bring more to the table, and it's awesome.
100%. Geez, I've got a list of questions that keeps going on. To honor your time, sir, and to honor the listening audience as we're coming to the top of the hour here, I will put a request in right now, which I seem to be doing this with all my top guest interview. We'll come back for part 2 to keep diving into this, because there's so much more I want to unpack with you, to hear your brilliance and your expertise of playing in this field, because this is in different ways, but it's a field that I've been in for decades, which is the human performance. How do we access the potential that we have and grow that wherever we're at in our life, whatever we're focusing on in those domains in our life? So to leave the audience with some digestible, practical, right? Let's do a quick recap. This beautiful thing called heart rate variability, right? It's a big catchphrase. It's been out in the field now for a few years, which is, how can I put my system into a place of duress, a challenge, which increases my physiology, and then the techniques to bring that down. Breath is one of the most profound ways to do that. I can consciously intervene and bring my system back into the here and now, instead of going to what I perceive is, I am now out of control. You're out of control because you gave the reins over to your mind that's now in stress, right? We get to intervene, breathe, and come back online. Yep. So what would you leave with the listening audience? Here are practical things to do to start applying these principles that you've shared, so we can have increased information processing, that we can intervene in our physiology and stay present no matter what's going on, and to dance with wherever we happen to be in the quote unquote challenge or stress spectrum.
So one of the big things, like you said, conscious breath work, and I'll actually share that with you. Practice breathing. Don't forget to breathe, right? But practice breathing and breathing properly so that you can be better equipped to live in the moment. Don't be afraid of uncomfortable situations. And I don't mean uncomfortable in a bad sense, but challenge yourself, right? Make sure that you're challenging yourself so that you can continue to grow. however that needs to be done for you as an individual. And the big one is understand that we live in a multidimensional world, so we should better ourselves multidimensionally, right? Don't just focus on one aspect, but start to incorporate or integrate into your lives these other components to help you grow your ability to make decisions. Like I said, if you are working out, work out and do math. While you're resting between your sets, if you're on the weights, pick up a book, do something that puts other information into your brain so that you can start to grow your capacity to function and process information under stress, because that's what you're doing. It's a low form, right? I do a set of squats, I read a poem. It's as silly as it may sound, I'm inputting data while I'm under stress. So that transfers, later down the line, and as we grow it transfers to my ability to do just that, operate under stress. So if we start doing those things, if we start breathing, we start integrating, and we start just putting ourselves or accepting that good stress into our lives, you're going to grow and you're going to be better for it.
Beautiful. And so in closing on my end, ladies and gentlemen, what was just shared throughout the entire conversation, and that is, as if this is new for you and you're applying the principles that were just summarized, please know, right? It's not an if, know that it's already part of the process. Initially, especially when you start to do the multi-dimensional aspects, you're not going to be successful at them, right? And this is what intimidates people. I don't want to experience the ridicule, the judgment, the embarrassment. That's just all silliness, right? If you use that to take yourself out, you're done before you started. And I've done it, so I know that to be true. Versus know that you're not failing, you're just not successful at it because you haven't done it enough to make it a new skill set where, I can do squats and handle a math equation at the same time. I've never done it before. This is the first time, right? Great. Or whatever the capacity is and whatever the challenge of that action step is, know that's going to happen. So you can already take that obstacle out of the way and recognize I'm learning. It's a learning curve. In my world, the only way you can fail is when you quit. It's the only way. You will always succeed as long as you stick with it. You will achieve what you're after. Just stick with it. You deserve it. And we deserve it because you have gifts that only you came here to give. And we need you to up level so you can give them, especially in this day and time. So I want to really thank Master Sergeant Jarad Underwood for taking his time to share his brilliance with us. And I definitely will have him come back because there's so much more I want to unpack to keep unfolding this. I just choose to honor everybody's time, Master Sergeants and yours listening audience. Thank you for engaging in the Tao Living podcast, The Art of Living. Share this with those you love so they too can up level. Abundant blessings. Thank you for tuning in to the Tao Living podcast, The Art of Living. Now go to loucorletto.com, LOUCORLETO.com to receive your free training, the operator's manual for your vehicle. See, when you buy a phone, you get a manual. When you buy a car, you get a manual. When you entered your body, no manual. Let me teach you how it's really designed to work. Also, help me help others and share this podcast far and wide. And subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. Until next time, abundant blessings.